Have you ever felt a quiet heaviness you couldn't explain, a subtle tightening in your chest? Not fear, not anxiety, just a dull ache from carrying what was never yours to hold. It happens when you've said yes too often, when you've silenced your instincts to keep the peace, when you've mistaken tolerance for strength. Over time, it doesn't break you, it wears you down. And what's most dangerous is that you start calling it normal, but it isn't. What you've been enduring may not look like harm on the surface, but it's been chipping away at your dignity, your clarity, your sense of self. This video is a mirror, not to accuse, but to awaken. We're going to walk through 7 patterns that may be quietly reshaping your life without your consent. You don't need to brace yourself. Just breathe, observe, and if something resonates, stay with it. Your freedom may begin with simply recognizing what should never have been accepted. 1. The silent strategy of emotional control. There are forces that don't need to shout to control you. They don't strike loudly or leave visible scars. Instead, they unfold in soft tones, polite suggestions, and whispered doubts disguised as care. They enter your life gently, cloaked in concern, a well-placed comment, a question that makes you hesitate, a sentence that seems harmless, but coils around your mind like smoke, subtle, invasive, and difficult to detect. This is the nature of covert emotional manipulation. It does not bind you with chains. It convinces you to forge them yourself. Stoic philosophy teaches that a person must remain sovereign over their inner life. If someone else begins to dictate how you think, what you feel, or how you view yourself, you have already surrendered your most sacred possession, your mind. And make no mistake, manipulation doesn't begin with a demand. It begins with a doubt, not in them, but in you. I'm saying this for your own good. They claim you're too sensitive. If you cared, you'd do this. And so begins the erosion not of your actions, but of your inner judgment. The very compass Stoicism teaches you to protect above all. The Stoic stands guard at the gates of the soul. When you fail to defend your mind from subtle intrusions, you slowly become malleable clay in someone else's hands. They do not force you to obey, they simply get you to question your instincts, your reason, your clarity. And once you abandon the trust in your own reasoned judgment, you're no longer living, you're reacting, adjusting, appeasing, reshaping yourself, not out of love, but out of fear. Emotional manipulation feeds off your silence. It relies on your fear of conflict, your dread of disappointing others, your habit of mistaking peace for virtue. But the Stoic knows peace bought by self-betrayal is not peace, it's bondage. If you allow someone to reshape your truth in the name of harmony, you have not cultivated virtue. You've submitted to tyranny disguised as affection. The manipulators often come cloaked in roles of intimacy, lovers, parents, friends, mentors, and that makes their tactics more effective, more insidious, because you hesitate, because your loyalty blinds you, because somewhere along the way, you were taught that to love someone means to yield to them, but that's a lie. Love, if it is real, never demands the sacrifice of your soul. It never asks you to shrink so someone else can feel tall. The Stoics understood this well. They warned that the mind is the only thing we truly own. The world may take your possessions, your body, your status, but no one can take your reason without your permission. Yet how often do we give that permission away, simply to be accepted? How often do we trade clarity for comfort, integrity for approval, silence for survival? When someone emotionally manipulates you, they are not simply testing your boundaries, they are training you to forget that boundaries exist at all. Each time you remain silent when you should speak, they learn. Each time you adjust to keep the peace, they take note. Each time you question your own instincts to avoid a difficult conversation, they advance, and eventually, they no longer have to push. You walk willingly into their mold, and you call it compromise. You call it love. You call it maturity. But in truth, it's self-abandonment dressed in noble language. Stoicism does not demand confrontation for its own sake, but it does demand clarity. It teaches that to see clearly is to live wisely. And you cannot see clearly if your perception is always second-guessed, always filtered through someone else's disapproval, always subject to someone else's shifting emotional terrain. If you feel like you're always walking on eggshells, always trying not to disappoint, always unsure whether you're the problem, then you've already been pulled into someone else's drama, and that's the surest way to lose yourself. The Stoic path is the path of disciplined perception. When someone uses emotion as a weapon, guilt, shame, tears, silence, withdrawal, it is your responsibility to step back and observe. Is their pain a call for compassion or a tactic to control? Are you being invited into connection or conscripted into submission? There is a difference, and your peace depends on recognizing it. Emotional manipulation thrives in environments where no one names what is happening. It is fed by ambiguity. It grows in the shadows. The Stoic approach is not to dramatize, but to name things honestly, without hatred, without panic, but also without denial. To say clearly, this is not love, this is control, this is not care, this is pressure, this is not me choosing it, is me being cornered into compliance. And once you name it, you have a choice. You can stay and participate in the cycle, or you can choose dignity over dependency, clarity over confusion, self-respect over silence. You are not here to be shaped by anyone's fears, wounds, or unmet needs. You are not here to trade your soul for the illusion of being loved. You are here to grow in truth, to live in alignment with your values, to remain unshaken in the face of emotional storms. That is your responsibility. That is your power. And no one can take it unless you give it away. So be cautious with those who hide control beneath concern. Be firm with those who whisper shame beneath the mask of love. And above all, remain loyal to your reason, to your clarity, to your highest self. Because when you abandon that, nothing else you gain is worth it. At the end of the day, a Stoic doesn't just avoid being manipulated, they become unmanipulatable, not through coldness, but through self-possession, not through aggression, but through calm, deliberate awareness. You do not have to raise your voice to reclaim your life. You only have to stop giving it away in pieces. 2. When mockery masquerades as connection. There's a particular kind of harm that doesn't come with raised voices or clenched fists. It comes with a smile, a room full of laughter, a seemingly harmless joke that cuts deeper than any insult. This is the humiliation, cloaked in humor, the kind of cruelty that wears a mask of playfulness, making it difficult to call out without being labeled too sensitive, too serious, or too weak. And that's what makes it dangerous. It hides behind social acceptance, using laughter as a shield for violence that's invisible but no less damaging. Stoicism teaches us to guard the soul against that which distorts the self. When someone mocks you in jest, especially in front of others, it is rarely just a joke. It's a maneuver, a subtle assertion of power. They don't confront you directly. They chip away at your worth under the guise of levity. They smile while lowering your place in the group. And when you flinch, the blame shifts to you. It was just a joke. Don't be so dramatic. You can't take a little humor. Now you're no longer the victim, you're the problem. This is how manipulation evolves. When control in private no longer satisfies, humiliation becomes the public extension of that dominance. And if you don't respond, if you play along, if you force yourself to laugh just to survive the moment, you reinforce the game. You allow the knife to be sharpened again. But if you resist, if you interrupt the performance with a calm but firm refusal, you risk being isolated, shamed, made the outcast. This is the trap. Speak and you lose the group. Stay silent and you lose yourself. A Stoic does not exist to please the crowd. He does not laugh to belong. He does not accept disrespect because it's dressed in sarcasm. Your role is not to be the emotional sponge for someone else's insecurities. When others mock to mask their own lack of control, when they reduce others to elevate themselves, they are not being clever, they are exposing their own fragility. Their need to dominate through jokes reveals what they fear most, facing their own inadequacy in silence. The Stoics warned us, what you tolerate becomes your teacher, and what you laugh off in discomfort becomes the script that others follow. If every gathering becomes an arena where you are the punchline, then your silence becomes permission. And worse, over time, the repetition becomes reality, not because it's true, but because the mind internalizes patterns. The soul adapts to repeated injuries unless one rises to stop them. And if no boundary is drawn, these verbal slights mutate into something more insidious, the erosion of your own self-trust. It's not just about being mocked. It's about what it teaches your mind. That maybe they're right. That maybe you are too much. That maybe staying quiet is safer. But the Stoic knows peace without dignity is not peace. Acceptance without self-respect is not strength. There's a difference between humility and humiliation. One is a virtue. The other is a slow unraveling of who you are, packaged as entertainment for those who fear their own reflection too much to look inward. Understand this. People don't mock what they don't fear. They ridicule what reminds them of their own unresolved wounds. Your presence, your honesty, your refusal to bend may ignite their discomfort. So they dress it in jokes and offer it to the crowd. But that's not your shame to carry. It's not your role to become the relief for their lack of introspection. So what does the Stoic do when faced with laughter that wounds? He does not retaliate with louder words. He does not beg for understanding. He observes with calm detachment and draws a line not to punish, but to preserve what must not be lost his center. He does not need to convince anyone that he deserves respect. He simply lives in a way that makes disrespect obvious. And once it becomes obvious, it loses its power. There's a dignity in stillness, in not laughing when it isn't funny, in not clapping for cruelty, in choosing to walk away rather than become the tolerated target of insecure people. The strength lies not in how loud your protest is, but in how unwavering your presence becomes. You can be silent and still unshakable. You can be calm and still immovable. And that is where the Stoic finds his true stance, not in the eyes of others, but in the unflinching mirror of his own reason. It may cost you some circles, it may leave you standing alone, but better to stand alone with your integrity than sit among many who find joy in tearing others down. Remember, those who use humor to harm are not strong. They are signaling their need to diminish what they cannot confront in themselves. Don't be the echo of their emptiness. Don't validate the violence of symbolic jokes just because they come wrapped in laughter. And if one day you find yourself hesitating to speak, caught between discomfort and silence, ask the Stoic question: is this worthy of my assent? Does this joke align with my values, with my self-respect? If not, withdraw your agreement, reclaim your space. Choose the path that is harder but freer, because once you allow them to make you the joke, the next thing they do is make you doubt your own perception. And once that happens, You are no longer fighting words. You are fighting for your reality. That is a battle too costly to enter unprepared. So stand now, speak now, or at the very least, do not laugh when the weapon is disguised as a smile. 3. Gaslighting, the quiet collapse of truth. There is a war more dangerous than open conflict, a war fought not with weapons, but with doubt. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, when someone starts to rewrite the narrative of your experience. They deny what they said. They mock your memory. They tell you you're imagining things that never happened. You're overreacting. You're always so dramatic. And slowly, the thread that connects you to your inner truth begins to unravel. This is gaslighting, the psychological warfare that replaces clarity with confusion. And the most dangerous part isn't what they say, it's what you begin to believe. Because the human mind, in its deep instinct for survival, adapts. When someone consistently dismisses your reality, you don't just question them, you begin to question yourself. What if I really did misunderstand? What if I am too sensitive? Maybe this is my fault. And just like that, your mind is no longer yours. You are living within a narrative shaped by someone else's convenience, someone else's denial, someone else's fear of being held accountable. The Stoics warned us, if you do not protect your mind, someone else will use it against you. Your perceptions, your memories, your emotional signals. These are sacred tools for navigating life, but gaslighting corrodes them, not by attacking, but by eroding. You don't notice it right away. There are no raised voices, no dramatic fights, only a steady fog that settles over your judgment. And one day, you look around and no longer recognize your own reality. You don't know if the problem is the world around you, or the fact that you've spent so long denying your own instincts to keep someone else comfortable. But clarity is the Stoic's weapon, and that means we must name this tactic for what it is: control disguised as reason, a manipulative rewriting of events meant to keep you uncertain. Because if you're always doubting yourself, you're easier to direct, easier to silence, easier to dominate. Gaslighting isn't just about lies, it's about power. And when it works, it doesn't leave bruises. It leaves emptiness. You don't get angry anymore. You get numb. You stop arguing. Not because you've found peace, but because you no longer trust your own voice. That is the cost. Not just of deception, but of surrendering your inner compass. The Stoic refuses that surrender, not with rage, not with vengeance, but with stillness and self-awareness. When someone denies your truth, you do not beg them to see it. You return to your reason. You write it down. You observe the patterns. You speak what you know to be true, not to convince them, but to remain intact. You remind yourself, clarity is not given by others. It is cultivated within, and when they escalate, when the fog deepens, and confusion becomes your new normal, they often take it a step further. Now that you're disoriented, they begin to help you understand. They tell you what happened, how you should feel, what your motivations were. They become the narrator of your life, not because they understand you, but because they've trained you to forget that you once understood yourself. That is the final cruelty. They don't just gaslight to win a single moment. They do it to become the architect of your entire perception. But here's the Stoic truth. No one can hold that role unless you abandon it first. You do not need their version of events. You need your presence, your calm, your return to what you saw, what you felt, what you knew, before you began to question it all in order to be accepted. So how do you fight gaslighting the Stoic way? You don't fight to prove. You fight to protect your mind. You keep record of your thoughts. You practice radical honesty with yourself. You say, "This hurt. I saw it. I remember it. I don't need your approval to know it happened. You surround yourself with truth, not noise, with calm reflection, not emotional bait. And when necessary, you walk away from those who persistently deny your humanity, even if they once meant something to you. Because the Stoic understands peace without truth is not peace. It is manipulation in disguise. And your task is not to convince the world, it's to remain unbroken by it. So if you've ever doubted your memory, your instincts, your emotions because someone said you're too much or that never happened, let this be your anchor. Your perception is worth defending. Your mind is worth clarity. And your truth does not require permission to exist. Protect it. And if you've been trapped in the fog, step out. No need to scream. No need to justify. Just return to your inner clarity, where no one can rewrite what you know. That's where your power begins. 4. Emotional invalidation, erasing the self. There's a kind of wound that leaves no visible mark, but over time, it reshapes who you are. It begins with a phrase, a sigh, a smirk when someone listens to your truth, not to understand it, but to silence it. You speak your pain, and they wave it off. You try to explain your discomfort, and they tell you you're being dramatic. It's not a big deal. You're always so emotional. You take everything too seriously. That's how systematic emotional invalidation begins, not as an open attack, but as a persistent erosion. It's the message behind the words that does the most damage. Your emotions are excessive. Your experience is inconvenient. Your voice makes me uncomfortable, so I will pretend it has no weight. And if it happens often enough, you internalize it. You learn to hold your breath when something hurts. You start editing your feelings before they've even been spoken. You teach yourself to endure rather than express. Not because you've grown stronger, but because you've been conditioned to believe that your feelings don't matter. But the Stoic does not see emotion as weakness. The Stoic sees it as signal something to be examined, not erased. Emotional discipline is not emotional silence. True discipline is having the courage to feel, the clarity to interpret, and the wisdom to respond without distortion. When someone consistently invalidates your emotions, they are not teaching you strength. They are teaching you suppression, and suppression is not strength, it's corrosion. The more you swallow, the more distant you become from yourself. You begin to forget what it feels like to speak freely, to feel deeply, to exist without the fear of being called too much. And over time, the version of you that once felt vibrant, expressive, human fades into a muted shell that exists only to maintain the peace of others. But Stoicism teaches that we are not here to appease. We are here to live in accordance with nature, which includes the nature of the soul. A soul cannot flourish when its truths are buried. A mind cannot remain sharp when its insights are dismissed. The Stoic does not bend to avoid making others uncomfortable. He speaks with clarity and listens with discernment, not because he needs to be heard, but because truth demands to be honored. And here's the deeper danger: emotions that are dismissed do not disappear. They transform. They surface in other ways: restlessness, numbness, unexplained fatigue. The tension builds. The pressure grows. And because you never gave yourself permission to process your pain in the light, it begins to operate in the shadows, controlling your thoughts, your moods, your behaviors. You become anxious in spaces where you used to feel calm. You overthink words that once felt natural. You begin to anticipate rejection in every conversation, not because it's there, but because you've been taught that your emotional reality is always too much for others to handle. But enough. Emotional invalidation is not your burden to carry. The Stoic path invites you to reclaim your space, not by demanding approval, but by standing firmly in what is true. When someone tells you your emotions are wrong, that's not philosophy, that's manipulation. And you do not owe anyone a performance of numbness just to remain accepted. So what do? You begin by honoring your own experience. You sit with your emotions not to be consumed by them, but to understand them. You allow yourself to speak, not to convince others, but to affirm your own clarity. And when someone tries to diminish what's real to you, you pause, observe, and remember their discomfort is not your fault. Their denial is not your reality. Their impatience does not erase your truth. You are not here to be emotionally convenient. You are here to live fully. That means feeling. That means naming. That means respecting your inner world, even when others don't. Let your voice return, not loud, not angry, but grounded. Let your truth rise not to destroy, but to liberate. Because the person who invalidates your inner world isn't just denying your emotions, they are testing whether you will abandon yourself to keep their approval. And the Stoic response is simple but profound. I will not. The 5. Silent contempt, the most subtle cruelty. There comes a point when words are no longer used as weapons because silence does the job more precisely. After the manipulation, the mockery, the confusion, and the dismissal comes the final tactic. Not noise, not confrontation, not rage, but silent contempt. That calculated absence, that message never answered, that room you enter and feel like you don't exist, the empty glance, the lack of acknowledgement, not an insult, but the erasure of your presence. And the most piercing part of this form of cruelty is that it leaves no fingerprints. They don't scream, they don't argue, they don't even offer the decency of conflict. They just vanish emotionally while still being physically there. And in that absence, they communicate everything. You don't matter. You're not worth my energy. I've decided you are nothing. The Stoics understood that the deepest wounds are not always physical or verbal. They are existential. To be ignored by someone you once trusted, someone whose opinion once meant something to you, can feel like a death by silence, because humans are wired for connection and contempt, especially when delivered through silence, strikes at the heart of that need. It does not challenge you, it erases you, and the soul recoils in response. You don't just feel dismissed, you begin to question whether you even exist in their eyes. Contempt is the purest form of emotional punishment. It needs no explanation, because it feeds off ambiguity. It forces you to fill in the silence with your own fears. You ask yourself, what did I do? Why won't they respond? Are they hurt, or am I being punished? And in that endless guessing, you become consumed. You wait, you explain, you write texts you don't send, you apologize for things you don't understand. You bargain with their absence, and little by little, your self-respect bleeds out in silence. The Stoic response is not to react with desperation, but with discernment. You must see contempt for what it is, a tactic, not a truth. A choice made by someone who no longer respects you enough to communicate, but still wants to dominate your emotional state. Their silence is not neutral. It is a message designed to make you beg for noise. And when you do, they've won. But the Stoic does not beg for recognition. He does not base his worth on the moods or methods of others. He recognizes that when someone withdraws their attention as a weapon, they are not demonstrating power, they are revealing emotional immaturity. Their silence says more about their inability to confront than about your value. A person who truly respects themselves does not erase others to feel strong. They speak with clarity. They leave with dignity. They do not punish through indifference. And yet, if you are honest, you know how much it hurts. You know how it gnaws at you, not just because they're silent, but because you once depended on their presence. And that is the part that Stoicism calls you to examine. Not their contempt, but your attachment to their voice. Because the real danger is not just that they are silent, it's that you've come to believe their silence defines your worth, that their attention is your oxygen, that their response determines your reality. But no one holds that power unless you hand it to them. The Stoic path demands a return to inner stability. When someone withholds attention to destabilize you, your only counter is to become unshakable. You must stop waiting for a message that was never meant to comfort you. You must stop translating silence as a riddle you're meant to solve. Let their coldness be theirs. Do not make it yours. Do not respond to absence by abandoning yourself. Because here's the truth. Silence is a tool of control when it is used with intention. And when you tolerate it long enough, you adapt. You begin to censor yourself before you even speak. You begin to expect indifference. You become quieter, smaller, more careful. You stop asking. You stop expressing. You begin to shrink, not to protect yourself, but to avoid triggering more absence. And that is the final injury. You do their job for them. If you've reached this point, if you've endured all the previous forms of harm without explosion, then you are not weak, but you are wounded. And that wound now speaks in your silence. You no longer argue. You no longer trust your words will be heard. You no longer feel like your presence matters. But that belief is not truth. It is the residue of repeated contempt. The Stoics taught that we are not to depend on the external for our inner anchoring, not approval, not response, not connection. True freedom comes when you stop needing others to reflect your worth. When someone withholds presence as punishment, you respond not with pleading, but with presence of mind. You reclaim yourself. You remember their silence is not your sentence. It's their confession. So the question now is not, why don't they respond? The question is, why am I still waiting? The answer may not be easy, but it will set you free. And yes, what comes next is even more insidious. Because once silent contempt has shaped your nervous system, once it has trained you to expect erasure, the next behaviors don't just destroy your peace, they begin to rewrite your identity. And if you do not detect them in time, you don't just suffer from them, you become someone who repeats them. Are you ready to see what those final two behaviors are? Because only those who have survived the silence have the strength to face what's coming. 6. When sacrifice becomes self-betrayal. Up until now, we've explored how others manipulate your reality, how they ridicule, confuse, and erase you. But what happens next is no longer about what they do to you. It's about what you start doing to yourself. This sixth behavior is the most deceptive of all, because it's celebrated, it's praised, it's even mistaken for virtue. It's the normalization of sacrifice when giving up your needs, your space. Your voice becomes not just a habit, but your identity. From a young age, you were taught to put others first, to be the bigger person, to be generous, patient, forgiving, and these aren't inherently wrong. But here's the Stoic warning: a virtue becomes a vice the moment it's used against your integrity. When selflessness becomes self-erasure, when patience becomes permission, when giving becomes disappearing, you are no longer practicing strength. You are practicing self-abandonment. You begin to think that love means always yielding, that maturity means never asserting, that peace is found by remaining silent. And so you smile when you want to speak. You give when you're depleted. You stay when your soul is begging you to leave. And the world claps for you. They admire how strong you are, how kind, how unproblematic. But no one stops to ask the deeper question: What part of you had to die to make everyone else comfortable? The Stoics teach that your first duty is to your inner citadel, the core of your being where reason, integrity, and clarity reside. And when you betray that center in the name of service, you're not growing, you're fragmenting, you're living externally while crumbling internally. Because sacrifice, when done unconsciously, when done chronically, becomes a form of emotional exile. You walk further and further away from your own truth until one day you can't hear it anymore. You become the person who's always available for others, but never for yourself. The one who shows up to fix everything except the aching void inside. You offer time you don't have, energy you can't spare, forgiveness you haven't processed, and love you never receive in return. And the most tragic part, you start believing this is what goodness looks like. But the Stoic reframes goodness not as weakness, not as the absence of boundaries, but as strength guided by wisdom. Real virtue is not found in burning yourself out for others. It's found in knowing when to give and when to guard, when to extend grace and when to withdraw it, when to bend and when to hold firm. The world may never teach you this. It prefers you agreeable, quiet, and convenient. It praises the one who puts everyone else first, without ever stopping to notice what it costs them. But Stoicism invites a harder question. Can you truly serve the world if you are disconnected from yourself? Can you give freely if you've hollowed out your soul to maintain the image of being good? Perpetual sacrifice without replenishment is not noble. It's unsustainable. And in time, it turns bitter. You become exhausted, resentful, emotionally numb, but still smiling, still giving, still saying yes, until eventually the exhaustion becomes identity. You no longer know what you want, what you feel, what you need. You've trained yourself so well to be second that the very thought of choosing yourself feels selfish. But choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. The Stoic doesn't abandon the self in the name of harmony. They refine it, protect it, center it, because if you lose your voice, your clarity, your internal boundaries, you lose the very thing that makes you capable of offering anything real to others. Your presence becomes a performance. Your love becomes a transaction. Your existence becomes an echo of everyone else's needs. And here lies the turning point. You must reclaim what you abandoned in the name of virtue. Your time, your truth, your space, your needs. You must remember that service without self-respect is not virtue, it's surrender. That giving without discernment is not generosity. It's a plea to be seen. That disappearing isn't grace. It's a cry for belonging in a world that only values what you do, not who you are. So ask yourself, when was the last time you said yes and meant it? When was the last time you gave something without resentment trailing behind it? When was the last time you felt full, not from being praised for your selflessness, but from standing firm in your own truth? The Stoic path is not the easy one. It will not ask you to please everyone. It will ask you to live in accordance with what is essential. And that means breaking the spell of performance. That means recognizing that self-neglect disguised as love is not love at all. It's fear, it's pattern, it's habit, and it can be unlearned. Start here. Speak when you're silent out of fear. Rest when you feel guilty for being tired. Say no without justifying it. Choose yourself when you've been taught to make others your only priority. And watch how your clarity, your strength, your presence begin to return. You are not here to prove your worth by vanishing. You are here to embody it by being whole. 7. The cost of belonging, losing yourself. There is a line that, once crossed, changes everything. A point where after enduring too much manipulation, mockery, silence, rejection, you no longer fight, you no longer ask, you no longer feel, you just endure. This is the final behavior, and it is the most soul-crushing of all the acceptance of contempt as the price for belonging. You convince yourself that being tolerated is better than being alone, that existing in someone else's shadow is safer than standing alone in your own light. So you stay, you shrink, you adjust, you rationalize the pain, you begin to accept crumbs of connection, mistaking them for nourishment. You smile through the cold silence. You interpret neglect as strength. You justify distance as maturity. But inside, something is breaking, not suddenly, quietly, repeatedly, until there is nothing left to break. This is what the Stoics would call the death of the inner self, not by catastrophe, but by slow and silent consent. Because what you allow repeatedly, you become when you make peace with being ignored, diminished, erased day after day. You are not surviving. You are surrendering. And the most dangerous part is that over time, you begin to believe you deserve it, that your voice is too loud, that your needs are too much, that your presence is a burden. And so, you disappear from yourself. But make no mistake, this is not peace. This is not love. This is not strength. This is psychic erosion. A life of quiet obedience to unspoken conditions. And the Stoic would urge you, do not call that virtue. Do not mistake submission for wisdom or silence for resilience. Loneliness hurts, yes, but compromising your soul just to be included in a room where you are not respected, that is far worse. That is spiritual exile. You were not born to beg for your place in the world. You were born to inhabit it, fully, freely, without waiting for permission, without bending your truth to fit someone else's comfort. If you must twist your values, silence your instincts, or accept humiliation just to stay connected, it is not belonging. It is bondage. The Stoic path demands that you see clearly where you've handed away your power. It asks you to look, not outward at who hurt you, but inward at the part of you that accepted it as normal. Because until you face that honestly, you will keep returning to the same dynamics, the same patterns, the same self-betrayal, telling yourself it's easier that way, telling yourself it's not that bad. But you know better now. If you've made it to this point, if you've endured, if you've swallowed your truth, if you've stood quietly in rooms where your presence was barely acknowledged, then you also know the weight of this final behavior, the slow disappearance of yourself in exchange for a fragile, false sense of inclusion. But now you also know what it costs: your clarity, your dignity, your peace. The Stoic doesn't wait for external validation to act. He chooses in accordance with reason, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And sometimes, the most reasonable thing you can do is walk away from what numbs you, even if it once felt like home. You may lose people, you may lose patterns, you may lose entire versions of yourself, but what remains will be real, solid, yours. Let this be your turning point, not just a list of behaviors to avoid, but a mirror, one that reflects not who others are, but what you've allowed, and more importantly, who you're becoming now that you've seen it. You can no longer pretend you don't know. You can no longer unsee what you've seen. And now that clarity has come, the next step is yours. Not vengeance, not bitterness, but resolve. So, What will you do with it? Because nothing changes until you decide that self-betrayal is no longer an acceptable cost for temporary connection. That being alone in truth is better than being surrounded in falseness. That your peace is not negotiable. And when that decision is made not with anger, but with quiet strength, you reclaim what was always yours, your presence, your power, yourself. Don't close your eyes again. Stay awake. There's something no one ever says out loud, but you'll feel it from this moment forward. True power isn't found in being respected by others. It's found in no longer needing their respect to feel whole. That shift, the one where you stop reaching for approval and start standing in your own truth, is where everything begins to change. If this video touched even the smallest part of you, if a sentence, a silence, or a single example hit closer than you expected, then don't brush it off. Let it stay. Let it speak. And if you feel called to respond, leave these 3 words in the comments. No more silence. Not for performance. For clarity. For self-respect. For the part of you that's tired of carrying what was never yours to hold. Because what you tolerate doesn't make you stronger. It slowly buries you, and every time you smile through it, excuse it, or absorb it, a piece of you slips further away. But you don't have to keep doing that. Not now, not anymore. If you want to keep walking this path with more honesty, more strength, and less noise, feel free to subscribe. Not as a habit, but as a choice. These aren't just videos, they're mirrors, reminders, and quiet revolutions, and you deserve more of that. Now pause, take a breath, not to forget, but to feel what just shifted inside you. Walk differently, look people in the eye, set quiet boundaries, tolerate less, live more. Because once you wake up, you can't go back. And maybe, just maybe, that's the beginning of everything you've been waiting for. There's more ahead. I'll meet you in the next one.